So we're going to this, well, you could call it a dell, but it's this area of Japanese primroses that really love wet feet. And when they're happy, they naturalize in all kinds of colors, you know, pink and rose and white. Oh, see, other people are here.
There are other people who've heard about the primroses.
And I will say, I came a few days ago to scope it out, and it's not as extensive as previous years, but I've been observing them for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. Good morning. Maybe it's my imagination, but you know, they start here.
Yeah.
And here we have mostly this,
Right here.
well, crimson.
Fuchsia almost.
Fuchsia.
Magenta, like, yeah.
And their other names are candelabra primroses because they have whorls on the scape. There are other kinds of primroses that have this candelabra effect.
And what brought you into primroses before we get into the meat of the primroses? What got you into this group or this genre, this grouping of plants?
Well, I have to say, it was sort of accidental. I was born on a small farm in Virginia, always a kid who roamed around the farm looking at wildflowers. And I got to feel that I really knew all the wildflowers on the East Coast.
Yeah.
And then I came to Cornell for my graduate work and in plant biology. And one day I saw a population of little yellow flowers, you know, about this tall. And it was February, and I didn't know what they were. And I, you know, would drive by on my way to work in the electron microscopy lab. I was doing the ultrastructure of the African rubber vine. But finally I knocked on her door, and it was an Austrian woman. She said she didn't know what they were, except her uncle had sent them from Austria, and they were called the keys to heaven. And my first husband had just died a couple months before. I'm sentimental and emotional when it comes to, you know, nature and connections with people. So I thought, oh, this is kind of a important find here. And she gave me seeds and plants. And then a few years later, do you know the magazine Gardens Illustrated?
Yes.
Well, they had a seed packet offer. You could get, you know, 4 packets of Barnhaven primroses, you know, for £5 or something. So I ordered them because I love seed offers, you know. And they all germinated. I must have had 300 or 400 seedlings. And I planted them, and they weren't candelabras, but they were the same array of colors, the pinks and whites and purples. And I had a whole little sort of rock garden of them. And I took a lot of photos, of course, but back in those days, you didn't have cell phones. So I took my pictures to Ritz camera, and they blew one up and put it on the wall.
Oh my God, because they're like, these are so beautiful.
Yes. So one thing led to another, really. Well, I had actually had an adventure with primroses that was not so pleasant. I worked at Kew Gardens for a year, and I had to pot up a whole greenhouse of Primula obconica, and they're very allergenic. I didn't realize it. I was head to toe covered in the most horrible hives. I thought I was gonna die.
Oh my God.
But
you stuck with it.
I stuck with it. And then...
You didn't hold a grudge against that primrose.
No. And then my career, I did get my PhD, but one thing and another. I finally ended up at Ithaca College teaching science writing and writing as a naturalist. And I love teaching writing. And then I retired, and I kind of realized I'd almost inspired myself to become a writer. And I decided I knew how to write a book proposal, and I had stumbled upon this series of books. It's published by Reaction, and I stumbled on one called Snake, And my son, my older son, raises ball pythons. I've had hundreds of snakes. Well, only about 100 in the house, but now he has a snake facility. But anyway, I love the format of the books. There's social and cultural history, as well as the biology and the science. So I saw they had an animal series, but and then I saw they had a botanical series, and they hadn't done Primrose.
Yeah.
And this is a British company, and I thought this is really. Do you want to come and see?
Absolutely.
So I thought I'll just write a book proposal for Primrose.
Yeah.
And because
they bit.
Yes.
Yes.
Right away.
That's amazing.
And it's the way in life that one thing leads to another.
Yeah.
It was those primroses, the oxlip, that winter, that just planted a seed, if we'll continue that metaphor.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, actually, it turned out to be quite grueling to write the book because I didn't realize primroses are a huge genus.
Yeah.
450 species.
I was going to ask you, how many actual species have they sussed out?
Yeah. Most of them, the center of the origin is in the Himalayas.
These are plants that have grown up in areas that are not pleasant, probably.
Yes. Very hardy. They extreme conditions. Definitely. And then, the origin of this species, this is thought to be Japan or that area. Common primrose that's so well known of Shakespeare lore and so forth, that did originate in the Himalayas and then spread across and finally found their best home in the British Isles.
Okay, so people were trading them really early on then, because we talk about Shakespeare time. That's early, even before obviously Victorians were there taking the plants and everything along those lines. So this was early trading of these plants.
Well, you bring up an interesting point. Yeah, the botanical explorers were not really going to those areas in Shakespeare's time. They must have migrated, by trade routes. The Crusades, of course, they were trading spices and things. No, that part of the history is I'd love to know.
Yeah. But they're also so beautiful. I could imagine somebody says, I want to pick this flower, or I'd like to have these seeds in my garden. That's sometimes how plants travel, And
of course, even the common primroses likes damp areas, so they might have traveled by waterways.
That's true. And do they all like damp areas, or like to be have their roots temporarily wet? Like, I'm thinking if they're growing on rocks, rock faces, and they get a good rain and they get a nice douse on their roots, or are they kind of growing across all different types of habitats?
That's a good question too. This species particularly loves wet feet, and many of the other primroses are adapted for really rocky mountain crevices. They send roots way, way down. And so they do need moisture, but they have adapted to rocky limestone. They're limestone lovers, some of these other ones. But then there is the cowslip, which is a meadow primrose. So I have a kind of a hot garden clay soil, but the cowslip can handle that.
Yeah, so you'd probably, here at least, you'd need to augment your soil. Can we go take a closer look at these? And the fact that these are hardy, we're in zone 6, zone 5. These are plants that would grow well here, especially with our winters.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. And obviously they wouldn't mind a humid summer either because they like to be moist, I would imagine.
Definitely.
Yeah.
They're perennial and they self-sow.
Okay. So if they're self-sowing, they probably won't move up the mountain. They want to be closer to the water.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And they're growing in with some jewel weed I see here. Right?
Oh yes, which also likes
little wet feet. Now this is all the same species, but are there different variations, or do they just come naturally up with different colors?
They come naturally up with different colors. Some of the great plant explorers who went to Asia to bring back different kinds of primroses, they found hybrid swarms, which there are other candelabra primroses. And when you get species, this is one species here, but when you get 4 or 5 species growing together, they hybridize and they all intermingle. And then the color variation is enormous.
Yeah, because you had mentioned that there's like 450 species or whatever, but I know that these are ones that people hybridize a lot, and there are some funky looking ones that are like purple and rimmed with white or rimmed with yellows. And yeah.
There's a lot of hybridization going on, especially in Europe. The reason I got so fascinated with primroses, with the Gardens Illustrated adventure, is that it was an article on Florence Bellis, who started Barnhaven Primroses in Oregon during the Depression. She was a failed concert pianist. No one wanted concert pianists at that point. She moved into an unheated barn outside of Portland, and 2 years, no electricity, no water, but she had a hillside and a stream. The way the story goes and the way she told it, she bought 5 packets of primrose seeds from Sutton's, a British company. She spent the next 35 years hybridizing and created this strain of special primroses that were based on the common primrose and then other kinds of primroses. But the cover of the book, these are some of these colors are hers, these bronzy, coppery colors.
Right.
And in the book, I call it the Americanization of the primrose, because someone asked me, how did you dare write a book on the primrose? You're an American. You know, isn't that a British flower?
Yeah.
And I said, well, the primrose was Americanized by Florence Bellis.
Yeah.
And she started the American Primrose Society.
Wow.
I'm just retired as president of the American Primrose Society. But she would send free catalogs and free seeds all over the country into Canada. And she started it in 1941. She felt that growing plants was an antidote to the ravages of the Depression and war. She was passionate, obsessed. So, no, I do feel that primroses in America are thriving.
Yeah. I think that's amazing, and I think that you probably learned a lot while you're researching for this book.
Yes.
Now, is this the only species that's here, or would we be able to see other primroses like in this dell?
No, this is the only species that's here. And I don't know, we could go a little farther along if you want. I mean,
this is really beautiful. I can't believe I've never seen this little area. It's so sweet.
Isn't it sweet?
Yeah, it's really...
So they're creeping their way along. Look at those leaves.
Look at the leaves on that. It looks like an arum, you know?
Yeah.
Like some kind of aroid.
I'm certain it is.
Yeah.
It's one of those Lysicatum or one of those related to skunk cabbage.
Yeah. And these are Regersias, I think.
Yes,
those
yes.
tall ones.
Yes.
Yep. Like those.
So you can see they're migrating.
And look how darling this is, just like the pink throats and then the little eyes.
The eyes.
Yeah, so there's a lot of meaning when it comes to primroses, like in writing and poetry and everything along those lines. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yes.
Like what did they signify and symbolize?
What they signified was rebirth and spring. And you see, what I realized in researching was that the primrose of Shakespeare and many of the early poets, it's because they were so common, not that they were rare. Often we think that what's most special is rare, but the common primrose was everywhere. And it came up in the worst of weathers, in the sogginess and the darkness. You know, in England, they'll flower in end of December, January. And I have a primrose in Virginia, this little farm where I was born, that flowered December 31st one year.
Oh, wow.
So I think, you know, and the names like the keys to heaven, I think the power of the primrose lies in its ability to come up so early and to be there. And also, they were little plants. Some of they were cottage flowers. You know, you could put them right by your cottage, and you can eat the greens of the common primrose.
I was going to ask, are they edible, and how would you prepare them so that they're tasty, you know, or are they considered more of a famine food?
Oh, I think they're better than a famine food.
Okay.
Early in the spring, eat their leaves like a salad, like you eat dandelion greens.
Okay.
You know.
Yeah.
The other interesting thing about primroses is they do some odd things. They create, the Elizabethans called them the frantic and foolish primroses. They made double flowers. They made hose and hose, where one flower comes out of the one under it. It pops out of the middle of the other flower.
Yeah.
There's something about the early spring flowers.
Yeah. And the fact that they last so long through the cold season, and the fact that you're saying that they were common plants, that they're reliable, that, you know, people may have wrote about them because they are so reliable. They are there, they're ever present, you know, in people's lives. And that's something that they could turn to and expect to, especially if, like, they had really constant changing times with, like, say, war or famine or depression or something along those lines, that they could still rely on the primrose.
And they're agreeable. They are wild plants, but you can bring them into your garden and they stay. They don't mind being close. You know, there are some endemic plants of various kinds of beautiful wildflowers that are very hard to get to grow in a garden setting. Primroses will adapt. Not all of them. There's some that, you know, can't take a garden setting, but there are so many that do. This species, I have grown it in my garden, but it
needs that water.
It needs, if not running water, at least something spongy and marshy. But I was thinking of the common primrose, the little ones.
Yeah, the tiny ones.
Yeah. That they sell the supermarket.
In the supermarket ones,
Yes. I feel they market the supermarket primroses too early, but I bought 4 supermarket primroses this year, kept them cold in my basement with lights on, and they're now in the garden looking great.
And will they perennialize?
Yes.
Okay. See? Well, how about that? That's not so bad.
It's in their genes to perennialize.
Yeah, and then you're buying them at the supermarket, so they're probably like a really good price.
Yes. Well, I was going through the checkout line and the woman said, "That's so pretty, but you know, they always die." And I gave her a lecture on taking care of them. Because it's a shame to think of them not, you know.
Yeah. Well, she might just be keeping them on her desktop or something like that, like on her desk where she works. Or, Yeah, and mistreating them a little bit.
Yes.
But you're like, no, plant them in the garden.
There's a whole area you can go into. I don't know if you've ever known about auriculas.
No.
Well,
please elaborate.
Well, the auricula is a hybrid of 2 species that grow in the limestone of the Austrian Alps, that whole area, maybe also Italy. Well, back in about 1700, various botanical types who trekked up, they brought them down from the mountains. Well, also the roots were sold by the old lady root sellers for medicinal purposes. Anyway, they have felted leaves because in the high Alps, that kind of leaf.
With the sun and
they have this kind of farinosa mealy. And the flowers, once this hybrid occurred, just led to a Pandora's box of unique shades. Well, I can only tell you that the history of the auricula, which I covered in one chapter, and there have been books written about the auricula, they're like no flower you've ever seen. And one of the famous British horticulturalists said, the Auricula is the most man-made of flowers because the hybridizers took it through the years, and they are probably like the show flowers that you take them and put them on pots on black velvet and admire them.
The way that you're describing them makes me think of like a carnation or something. Like, only because you think about where the carnation came from, the pinks, which are like the little pink flowers that are so insignificant, and then all of a sudden you have this, exquisite, fancy flower that's like very ruffly. But
the reckless, they were called the reckless primrose.
The reckless primroses.
Yeah, now these are the first two. Mm-hmm. The historians feel these were the progenitors. But it's amazing what can happen through hybridization. Mm-hmm. This is what happened.
Oh, wow. So funky. They look like lollipops.
They do.
Or like the shape of one of those big globose alliums,
Yes. And this is the farina, but let me, this is what and here's, and we have some amazing auricula growers in this country, and the American Primrose Society, it's part of our mandate, but look at this.
Oh yeah, look at that. Close up.
And those little white specks are the farina that really the plant over the years in the high Alps used to deflect the sun. I now have 2 auriculas, and I'm trying to nurture them along. They take more different kinds of conditions, but it can be done. And I should tell you about Primulus sieboldi, which the American Primrose Society is trying to make more well known in the horticultural trade.
They look like pinwheels, almost like a phlox pinwheel.
Yes, like a phlox, don't they?
Yeah.
And this is also called, most people just call them sieboldi, but they're also a Japanese primrose. They come from that area. But they naturalize, and they're very easy to grow in this country in the right setting. They were a cult flower in Japan, and they grew the seedlings in little boxes.
Oh my goodness, look at how adorable.
Isn't that?
Yeah.
So we have several great sieboldi growers who are trying to see that they share their cultivars with
commercial growers.
Yes.
Just to kind of entice them.
Yeah.
Well, this is where David comes in, where, he sells plants. Why doesn't he just start to introduce some? You could kind of coax them along, can't you?
Oh, I'm working on that. I am working on that.
It seems like the right kind of setup.
Yeah.
You're throwing the ball. He just needs to alley-oop into the hoop.
Oh, he's excited. It's just that kind of bit. He does so many things in his business. Yeah. But he's selling little auriculas now.
Yeah. Oh, that's so fantastic. So if we ever head there, we must actually seek them out.
We must buy all of them.
We must buy all of auriculas. No, but I think also what's really nice about these flowers is that they're blooming early. I mean, it's still May, and I'm always like looking at plants. Like, I planted one of our gardens in the fall, so most of the plants are fall blooming. There's some phloxes and some dianthus that are popping up, but now my eyes are really geared towards what's blooming now, because you want to see blooms all throughout the year.
You do.
And it sounds like with a lot of the primulas, they seem to be blooming for a wide span of time, depending maybe on the primula.
Oh, you're absolutely right. You can start with the common primrose hybrids that start very early. Then you can move on to the candelabras and the sieboldi. You can have a 3-month stretch.
Yeah. And then is it recommended to deadhead them? Would they shoot out another spike afterwards, or how would you treat some of the primulas? And I know that's probably a generic question, and you might have to give me a generic answer, but maybe it's based on species. I'm not sure.
We tend not to deadhead them because you want them to self-seed. I mean, to set seed and then self-sow. So all these, you would just let the seeds develop, which is another plus for primroses. You don't have to deadhead them.
Yeah, that's great. They also, though, the way that especially the candelabras look, they look like they would be a nice cut flower.
Oh, well, I've never tried that because
Yeah.
they're so beautiful. But Symbolism, the other Japanese primroses, make wonderful cut flowers. I could put you onto someone on Instagram,
Okay.
one of our members, who puts out Instagram photos of vases full of Symbolism and others.
Oh my goodness, that's
Really,
lovely.
yeah.
You're starting some cult followers here, Elizabeth. Well, this is just lovely. Thank you so much for a little history and a little walk down the dell of primroses. And I think this is just enough to like whet people's appetites and to also appreciate a new not a new one, but a new genus that they may have not heard of, or that they hadn't appreciated in their own garden. And I think that this is just enough to give us a little bit of a taste for wanting to actually bring some of this into our own spaces. So thank you so
wonderful.
much.
Thank you.
After the stroll through Treman Woodland Walk at the Arboretum, Elizabeth was keen to show us how the primula had naturalized on her friend's property nearby. And these primula actually happened to be the progenitors of the ones at the Arboretum.
Okay, well, I really wanted to bring you, Summer, to this private property, which is a very watery, marshy area in general. This kind of the mother population to what we saw at the Cornell Botanic Garden. Audrey Harkness O'Connor lived here and planted these, and they have naturalized stupendously, one might say.
Yeah.
I told Chris, her son, who now owns the property, that this is a kingdom of Japanese primroses.
And they're everywhere. I mean, if you look at around the house and in the sides and around the streams, it's so floriferous here.
Chris says he only plants one or two if he wants them to spread, and he doesn't garden these. They garden themselves, and I really love it when a plant naturalizes.
Yeah.
Chris also mentioned that this is clay. If you have a very aquatic environment, certain plants will handle it like these Japanese primroses.
And not all plants love clay. I mean, people lament the fact that they have clay soil, and this is one that, as you said, just really thrives.
Yes. I'm amazed when I see them, and it's dazzling and beautiful. And oh, Chris also said the deer don't eat them.
Yeah, that was one thing I was curious about. But considering that they're thriving so much, and a lot of the deer-resistant plants are actually not from around here, and these are not from around here.
Exactly.
So
yeah.
And I think when you see large sweeps of plants like this, you really get the full scope of the colorway. And I was just mentioning to you off camera, there's that peachy cerise color that doesn't seem so common, but that's one that I think is really gorgeous. A little bit more towards this shade, you know?
And I think another of the charming features about these plants is that the vegetative part, the rosette at the bottom, these kind of delicately green, soft foliage. I mean, they're beautiful plants.
Well, also considering that these are in kind of almost shadier, like nooks and crannies.
Yes.
The fact that they have this light green leaf really illuminates them.
Perfect. You said it perfectly.
Yeah.
It does. It illuminates them.
Is it invasive though?
They don't seem to be invasive. Like they're naturalizing, right? But they're not pushing out the other plants around here. You see other plants growing in between them. The buttercups are growing in between them. You saw some Auricula's there. So it seems as if they are playing nicely with the others.
Yeah, and they only naturalize when they're happy. I would say they are not invasive. What's that plant that grows down all on the waterways down Route 17?
It's Japanese knotweed.
And now that is a true invasive.
Yeah.
But no, I would say no gardener would have to fear that their population would escape and create a notoriety.
Yeah, indeed. Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth, for sharing this with us, because I think we shall get some other, another idea of how it actually can naturalize within a more naturalistic setting as he has here.
And another tip, just plant one and see what happens. See if it spreads by itself.
Yeah.
So you don't have to do the work.
Indeed.
If you're enjoying botanical strolls like this, give the video a thumbs up and consider hitting the subscribe and notifications button so you're kept up to date when new videos launch. Subscribing also helps us grow the channel, which allows us to give back more to the community too. We're committing 10% of our Google AdSense dollars back to the Finger Lakes area, and that's being matched by our partners over at Espoma Organic. So your viewership and support really does help. Thanks so much, and we'll see you in the next video.